And this is a wide open event. You all may jump in if you have thoughts or questions, feel free. Or put your hand up and we'll recognize you. And I'll introduce Marja Samsom, Vince Pomilio, Ruth Hardinger, Cris Gianakos, and Jody Pinto, who all have work in this show. And why don't you all point your works out so that people know where they are?
All together?
All together. Well, anyway, my work is actually in the hallway next to the elevator. It's kind of like a little private room with one other person there. So it's the egg, in other words.
Over the door.
Over the door.
In a gilt frame.
Yes, in a gilt frame, as a good Dutch girl.
Vince Pomilio
That's like
showing here.
Beautiful.
Vince Pomilio showing here.
I'm the gray rectangle with the red square.
And oh, go ahead, Ruth, go.
All right, well, my piece is right over there, sort of by where Michael was walking. It's, yes, right there. You're pointing to it, yes. It's a graphite drawing and has sort of torn paper with a black line in it.
And mine is the small watercolor with a very long tone with a house in it called Rescue, and it's right over the piece of sculpture.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jody's piece has a blue sky.
Black water, blue sky.
Black water, blue sky. So, what is it that you like to do when you make art? What is your aim? What do you try to convey? What do you want people to take from your work? And another point is, do you think people will only enjoy your work if there's a lot of information given to them about your work, either before they look at it, while they're looking at it, or after they look at it?
That's a long question.
Yeah, very long.
It's intended to give you lots to run with.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it goes with the previous conversation about the installation in the museums, where everything is explained, and when you want to go look around, and before you look around, you're already being told what you have to see. So it kind of will follow up into that direction, because you brought that up another time, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I basically don't care about people at all when I'm making art. Only the people I'm collaborating with. When we're doing a show, then it's just you and me. The others will go ahead, we'll just move ahead. Whoever likes it, likes it. Everybody can respond to it however they want.
And that's interesting because my work is public art, and the work that I do, people use, they go through it. If it's a bridge, they walk through it. If it's a waterfront, so there's
Interaction.
Yes, absolutely. So you do have to think of people when you're making it, and you're always working with collaborators. So it's intense in terms of the public, but on the other hand, I do studio work, and that's very private, and as Cris said, you don't care what anybody thinks, or at least I don't. And the work isn't specifically about a bridge or specifically about a waterfront. It's sometimes figuration that's very strange, but it's the bedrock for the public work.
I like the very beginning stages because I love to bring new materials into the studio and play with them. Sometimes they're buried underneath the layers. But in the beginning, it's very sort of action and intuitive, and any kind of idea I have racing in my head, I'll just put down because I don't do any preliminary drawing. So everything happens on these are a lot of my work is on wooden panels, some of which I construct, and the painting actually starts during that stage as well. Sometimes the screws that attach the birch panel to the stretcher bars become part of the piece in the very beginning, and they'll dictate something else. And that's a really fun stage of the painting for me. I usually think about work that comes before it, because I usually work in multiples, like 3 or 4 pieces at a time. So, but what happens to the painting and when it goes out to the world is not really on my mind while making the painting so much.
I make a lot of sculpture work along with works on paper, and every once in a while painting comes up, or it has over time. And I guess I'm really interested in what materials will do, and a lot of that work has been casting concrete in cardboard boxes. And part of the reason for doing that is it was something, that's sort of like kind of crazy, casting a great big pile of concrete in a little box, or a box is like, having a very big conversation between what the materials can do together, and also how they're actually opposing kind of things, because concrete is very strong and all that, and cardboard, by the other hand, is like, it's very, it melts, it changes, it does all these things. So there's sort of a combination of things going on here in the process of the work. And so I don't think about, I do think about the size, but a lot of the things that happen in the process of making these pieces is a surprise to me, because they're cast in the box, and then I don't really know what it's going to look like until it dries, which takes weeks on end to cure. And then I open it up, and kaboom, here's this big surprise. So I find that very interesting. But in the work, for example, here, this is powdered graphite. I have been using milk, and part of the reason for the graphite is because it's a material, it's an element that is actually a pure carbon that keeps life going. And milk is something that keeps humans and all mammals going. So I'm thinking about those combination of things when I'm working on my art. And sometimes I'll think about a scale that I'm going to need to have it be, or where this is going to go in relationship to that piece, or to that piece, or to that room. So my work is really combined with a lot of those things, and then there are more things that I can talk about, but we'll stop right there for that one.
The thing I wanted to just clear up before was that general question of Hal asked. What I'm represented here by is what we might call a painting. That's sort of almost like a hobby for me. I'm trying to learn how to paint. I'm really a sculptor who makes large-scale installations, and which take collaboration. Sometimes it's functional art, sometimes it's not functional art. But it's such a wide range of experiences that go on while they're going through this this process. So all of us are going through very different. In every project we make, or every painting we make, we go through different feelings and emotions and struggles.
Well, then there's exactly the point where I'd like to jump in. Because it's an alchemical process in a way. You're talking about different materials. I, for example, work, and you with your birch mentioning, and you with the live action into a public project. I've had many projects in my life, so to speak, because I had an experience to also build a three-dimensional project, which was a restaurant. But before that, I did photography, and in order to maintain a career in New York, I started working with food and then became a chef. So the actuality of discovering what things go together, as is the cardboard and the cement, or you can use egg white and something else that doesn't go together, and then photographing it or doing something with it. The alchemical, the moment of wonder and discovery, whether it is for other people or whether you have that yourself and you convey that for other people, that can be an element. But if you find something that you're interested in, for example, I went to the performance of a friend of mine, and the composer, and he was speaking about 1, 2, 3, 4 is 10. So 1 through 4 is 10 if you add them up. So there are many ways in which, from the chaos of life, you can make a creation. And that could be either through inspiration of music, which I use all the time, or a conversation while we're here and I think, oh my gosh, that's very interesting. So the alchemical process of an artist, whether it's visual with materials or mental, is totally exciting to me. And somehow conveying that in a form that's either palatal or not. You'd like to maybe have people buy it or see it, but it's so exciting that you can't contain it. And that's how I feel about it.
So all of you listening, has what you've just heard helped you to appreciate the artworks by these 5 people more than you did 10 minutes ago? Or you don't know really what they're talking about, or you don't care what they're talking about, or yes, it does help you understand their work more, or something else?
Go for it.
Nobody has any idea.
Well, I mean, I've been watching Chris's work for longer than I'd like to think about, 30 odd years. I'm not sure I totally agree with what you were saying, since a lot of the body of your work is very public and requires viewer participation, whether it's physical or environmental.
When I get a problem from somebody, if it's functional art, if I get a problem to solve somewhere, like the problem I did at Thessaloniki to do the ancient sites, walkways for the ancient sites, I got there. I got there alone. I was told what the parameters were, and after that, I went about it in an intuitive way. I mean, I didn't start sitting down with every engineer and and the public people. That came later, and so I really had to fight my way through it. But in the end, I did get what I wanted. If I had to be in conflict with all that gang, I would have never gotten what I wanted to get done. So it is basically, what my collaboration was with, of course, with the engineer. So it's a 2-person, basically, and people from the antiquities, 3 people. People from the antiquities didn't know very much, but the engineer knew a lot. So the information I got from the engineer, I could make a work of art. So it just fit together somehow.
Well, I think it adds another dimension and it adds another layer, it adds depth, but I don't think it's necessary. But if you actually need to read the whole text to know what you're looking at, that is not right. You should be able to not know anything and still respond to it.
So in other words, take it for what it is.
So some of the people didn't hear what you said. Didn't you?
Oh, no, I said that I think it's great to hear this because it adds other layers and it adds depth. But I don't think it's necessary, especially before you see the work. I don't think it's necessary to know that. And
As a viewer.
as a viewer, I
Right.
think the sort of work that actually requires you to read the wall text to even know what you're looking at is not art.
I completely understand.
This has something to do with what Ruth was speaking about, actually, what we're all speaking about. I agree about having to read something on the wall to find out, or that tries to tell you what you should get from something that you're looking at. But there's also something that is, for instance, I spoke about watercolor. This is like a thumbtack compared to the watercolors that most people have seen of my work. They're 9 by 7 feet, the watercolors. And the reason they're 9 by 7 feet, even though this is considered an intimate medium, is because most of my work is out of doors and you're dealing with walking and earth and
Scale.
scale. And if you do wet on watercolor, just try and imagine this. This room is maybe
12 feet.
wide.
Yeah.
Something that's almost 12 feet wide by maybe 7 feet long, and you wet it with, say, a blue, a cobalt blue. The paper begins to heave and rise and it behaves like
Something
the
living.
ocean, like land. And then you take another color and you put on top of that, and they start to dance, they start to move, they start to become something that you're not totally in control of. And that's,
Very exciting.
in a way, I think what
The
we
wonder.
all do and what we all love, and the
That's the
risk
alchemical
of
reaction.
making art. It's something that's so exciting you can't stand it.
That's the alchemy in which you just, you can't, you
It's
have to,
alchemy,
you
yes.
have to do it.
Yeah.
Once you're in it, that's the part where you get hooked.
And
you
you're
think, "Oh,
looking
I
at
got
it,
it.
you're watching it
Something like that.
form, you're
Yes.
watching it happen,
If
or
you're-
you're waiting, or you're, including it in, or you're, being with a site for a while, thinking about it, loving it,
Yeah.
and then bringing in other people to make it happen.
Well, actually, being in art, making art, and circling around it, one, you're in the thing, the other one, you're contemplating, no matter how you do that, as you circle. And so I think the art making process is about actually those two things, but when you're in what you're doing and everything else falls away, I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And it can happen even when you're, if you're at a site and you're just letting it talk to you. You're not talking to it and saying, this is how you're going to look, or this is what I'm going to do. You're listening. It's,
And then the real challenge is whether to leave it alone or
Then you
what
have
the
to do
next
the
step might
editing.
be.
The editing is the
editing.
next step.
yeah.
Very
Because
exciting.
Yeah.
It gets very challenging, very tricky.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'm sorry.
Well, I actually think that there are some very, very appropriate times to explain what the work is about and where it's coming from.
Should you do that or someone else?
I think, well, I as an artist have done it sometimes, but it depends.
But isn't your job to create the work?
Yes, but I don't think you would make up these things that were part of what the work's about if I didn't say something. For example, this piece is called Pathways, okay? Where are pathways? What is a pathway? Are you gonna think about what that is?
But if someone sees that work of art without you here, you're giving them the title,
Right?
That's it.
That's giving them the
and you're
title.
giving them the work of art.
Yes,
So let's say you,
It's open-ended.
yeah,
But it is
let's-
open-ended.
Let's say you go to the theater, the playwright is giving you his or her play, and it has a title. And if you're lucky, there might even be a playbill that says a time and a place or a setting, but sometimes there isn't. How do you compare those, and where would you put the playwright to explain what the play is about the way that you're going to explain what the pathways are about?
Well, I think maybe because it's me, not a huge theater, it's a different way to express back to what you're asking. Well, for example, I find all my art also comes from experience of an issue, experience of a thing. So like in 2008, I met some people who had a small environmental committee, and they started a nonprofit organization, and they started to deal with hydrofracking for gas, and we were going through all the processes here that were going on when the S-Guys was being dealt with, and that was going on for a number of years, but Damascus citizens actually hired hydrogeologists to go in and understand what was going on with the underground and what was getting damaged down there, what could happen to the rocks, and all those things. So that actually was a big influence on my deciding to use the idea of pathway, and so, also pathways happen in your brain. Pathways happen when you're walking down the sidewalk. There are all sorts of ways that this work can be thought about. But on the other hand, I think that it's very interesting to know that there is a geological conversation happening here as well. Now, I'm not going to stand next to my piece and say that, but I think, you know, because I totally respect abstraction, and I respect that people can walk in and say, oh yeah, I'm going to see this in my way, which is fine. But on the other hand, you know, like having multiple languages or something like this, I don't know why it would be a problem, because if you don't speak Spanish to this piece and you need to, then you miss something. So, but I don't think that degrades the process or the possibilities that one can take out of a work like this.
Right, but the real question is, visual artists create visual art. So the language is the visual art, or is the language the visual art plus an explanation of the visual art?
Then you get into literary form.
Yeah, and we heard a comment that if there's too much explaining that has to be read before you can look at the work of art or understand the work of art, then it isn't art. So how do you react to that?
I don't necessarily
I don't
agree
think
with
that's,
that.
yeah, I don't agree.
Everyone is making art, selfies, everybody's walking on a selfie, everything's just an artist today. You just go into Blix and you ask how to make this and do that. I stand next to people who ask the salesperson, what do I do with this and what do I do with that? And then you're an artist. As Duchamp said, you know, I deem it art. Take it home, you put the red, the green, and you're an artist. Simple as that. We don't have to go through all this exercise about
the democratization of art has made it very easy for people to do whatever they want and think that. You know, entitlement is huge. So
people try to cook too, and they do horrible.
No, they're just going ahead and do them. That's
I don't think, I mean, there are artists who use language as part of their
Art and language.
absolutely.
No, but there was a collective called Art and Language.
Yes, right.
Yes, and so it really depends on the work itself.
There's
and
Gilbert
how-
and George.
But there you go,
So-
yeah.
Those
So-
early Carl Andre pieces that were Dia were incredible.
Right.
Yeah. And so,
Then you can go into the sort of development of language.
Lawrence
So
Wiener,
study,
right.
yeah.
So Hal, is
It's
it a
up to the
commitment?
artist.
Is it a commitment to a way of life that makes an artist, or is it?
No, it's the kind of eternal question that has, I think, some resonance in terms of the world at large. When is a visual image enough for someone? And when does that visual image only mean something if it's explained or written about or certified or praised or something else that involves words or talk? In other words, could any image in this room be enough for any of you to look at and say, I like that?
sure.
I like it. You may not even know why you like it, but you look at something and you say, I like that. And you want to keep looking at it. Or can you only like it if it's been explained and discussed?
Then comes the other part, which is also so amazing, is if you spend time with something. We spoke about it last time I was here. That when you're having this room and you come here first, that you see it one way. If you keep coming back, then you see it. And then finally, after looking at it for 3-4 months, you get familiar and you see certain pieces that maybe in the beginning you didn't like, and you start to like. So that's also there's another issue there of familiarity with the art or the piece of work that you're looking at, or the view out of your window that you get used to and you think that is beautiful, or maybe you get comfortable with that. It's a very large part of that too.
I mean, what we're talking about in many respects has to do with the entire history of art. If you see a Giotto, who cares what you're supposed to think? You just look at that work and you may love the blue, you may feel something about the hunched over figures, or the David, or whereas those works were all created for a specific reason, for the most part, and if it's an extraordinary work of art, it doesn't matter.
Think of Goya.
So you don't have to know why it was created.
No, I
Right.
don't think you do, not at all.
I agree.
Yeah.
Not at all.
I don't think, I agree with everyone. I think that the problem is that art is incredibly subjective. And through art history, you have different ways to perceive your reality, either as an artist or reflecting culture or society or whatever. And I think that the entry has changed drastically into art. And it varies, I think, with the particular piece that you might be looking at. Some art is almost immediate, your response. Some art takes a long time to kind of get into it, but it's as rich by spending that much more time to be with it, to live with it. I always think rather that any explanation is unnecessary, but it also is kind of an additional element that you can kind of juggle with your experience of getting into the work itself. It's complicated, and I think that as art has evolved and the different kinds of presentations and materials have evolved, that our entry into that is really quite different. So looking at a Giotto is quite different than looking at a Duchamp. The end result might be similar, but then they're radically different too. So I think even asking questions about whether or not it's art is not necessary. I really don't. I don't think, because that I think codifies things and I think kind of qualifies things, and it's unfair. It's a very personal experience. And yes, there's structures that art historians and museums, and they create this paradigm of what things should be or whatever. But ultimately, it comes down to that personal experience.
But I can only tell you, as an artist myself, or a sculptor, that say I make site-specific works, and when I go to a site and I spend some time with it, that site talks to me. I mean, it just says something to me that this belongs there. I don't know where that's coming from. It belongs there, and I know when it's off, and I know when it's on. I mean, intuitively, I can just know, and I back off and have to take more time with it. And there are places that are impossible, that you can't do something. What do you do then, you know? But the main thing is that where does the information come from for any art that's made, you know? Whether it's photography, whether it's performance work. That's the important thing, you know, what each individual has their whole life behind what they've been doing. Whether you are an athlete and it affects your work, or whether you're a chef and it affects your work, or vice versa. I mean, I think that's the most important thing, is that your experience, your life's experience, what you bring to it, what it brings to you, and it's constant back and forth. And the different environments that you've lived in, what did they feed into it? And your psychology and your athleticism and your all of this together makes what you finally end up making there. It could be just a dot on a white page, but that's it.
Well, it also depends, of course, on your background, your upbringing, and the perception of what you think your audience is. So there's nothing you can do about that either, because you can say it doesn't exist, but you know it's not true. So, you know, everyone knows if you're making art, someone's going to look at it, because that's one of the reasons why you're doing it. And for what reason, I don't know. And in that sense, because I just wanted to say that, you know, I just wanted to make a distinction, because I think it's true. For a lot of people, they think that, for example, they mention the word chef, and they say that it has something to do with me. But I'm actually an artist, and that's not the same as being a chef. And that's a very good moment to bring up that everyone is now being an artist. Because the making something beautiful, making something three-dimensional, or making something tangible or perishable, that could be very conceptual. It's not necessarily, but not everyone knows how to do that or wants to do that. So everyone can be doing whatever they want now, and it's whatever you decide to do, and who's going to value that. That's the big question. What hooks into from who says is what, who makes, and we all, of course. Because if you see the price of art in the secondary art market, when I first met Hal in 1975, I don't think that I was aware of the secondary art market was booming and there's going to be the prints coming up. I mean, there's always been a professional art market, but the amount of enormous quantity and quality and professionalism have so overwhelmed that and now that there's an attractive part that if you are young, you want to become an artist because it looks like such a great thing. And there are so many artists that there's probably much less room for anyone to become successful. So it's a very dualistic enterprise, and intriguing, and enticing, therefore.
Also, how the market affects how you work. If all of a sudden you're, making a group of paintings that hits a nerve, and people are responding, and galleries are responding, people are buying them. How does that affect what you're doing moving forward? Are you going to be as experimental? Are you going to kind of stick with the program? It gets very tricky with the marketplace.
Yeah, well, for example, I may bring in the other experience. I came from the Netherlands originally, and so there was an existing subsidizing going on of art. I was participating in it myself, and I found out, and I didn't like that actually. I didn't have to say that right away, but there you have it. So they would say you could, the next load of art was being accepted, and then you could apply for it. And you could see what other people do. You can see what you yourself are doing. I can see it in hindsight what I did. And it's somewhere lost in the collection of the Dutch government. I don't know where it is. But there is something, for example, what you just said. If you are being subsidized, or if you know that your art is being bought, very likely, not necessarily, that you produce something, you have to be careful that you don't become mediocre, which is so easy to do.
Oh yeah. One of the best things for me that really shook up what I was doing in the studio, I was asked to, I was invited to design and build a set at the Actors Studio with Arthur Penn and Estelle Parsons. And it was this crazy play about the bombing of the zoo in Sarajevo during the Bosnian-Serbian War. And it was this Italian journalist, playwright. And we had to create this, I had to create this set that also had to look like it was bombed out. And it was this, the scene was the cook that did all the food preparation for the animals was held up, and there with this zookeeper, this older guy, young woman and an older guy, and there was a sniper parading around with a gun looking to kill them. And it was like a three-person play with lots of action, sex, and drama. So I had to build this set and then make it look like it was bombed out. And I got to work with all these actor interns. And really, when I went back to the studio, I was so fired up because it was so different, and the collaboration really turned me on. Because you're alone, and you're in your studio, no one's around, and it gets, sometimes it's working with people and exciting people who are excited about what you're doing. It's really a kick.
So it made a better set.
Pardon?
It made a better set.
It made a better set, and I've stayed on for 7 plays, and that was at on 44th Street until Arthur Penn sort of retired from being the artistic director. But it was just great.
I remember when you were doing that.
You remember?
How you talked about it.
So the challenge, again, is to feel challenged so that you can create the wonder that excites you, because it's the alchemy.
What's the difference of the whole thing? And I think the collaboration was really a turn
out of context.
Yeah. And,
one of the things here, Hal, is that we're like from the old guys, on the block. We're the old guys on the block. What about all this, relationship between art now and art as we were making it 70s, 80s, 90s? A lot of us, most of us have worked 40 years, making art. And what kind of art is going out there now? There are two different perceptions here. How people view art and see art.
Well,
that's good.
Well, that raises the question of whether people see art at all. Or do they just see a photograph of it on their phone? And is that enough? And I think the answer is it's not enough, because if it was enough, no one would ever go to museum shows or art fairs or gallery shows. But what do you think?
But when they go around museum shows, they don't even look at the art, they look at their cell phones. So they're not actually looking at it. They're
Or
looking at this and taking a photograph of it along with everybody else, but they're not actually looking
They're
at
reading
the
the stuff on the wall.
Yeah.
Or they're
That's why nothing should be posted on the wall. But we went to the art fair, remember, and there were a lot of people looking though. We went to several, there were a lot of people. And I don't know whether that was because it was, you pay an admission fee, you go into the art fair, and people can peruse about it, but there were a lot of people, and everyone was watching. I didn't see that many people on their cell phone when we were there. Did you?
I think people use their camera to take a picture.
Yeah,
Right.
but they were looking
to
a lot.
perhaps remember something.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they were doing, your comment about the museum is
Well, it's like
interesting.
in modern. You go around in modern. You're not looking. I mean, they're not looking at anything. You know, on
Right,
the wall.
they're
looking at the
taking a
stuff.
picture that they imagine perhaps they will look at later. Is that what they're doing?
Or they're showing, no, they're showing their
They're
friends.
showing their friends, you know, something.
I think there's another way of looking at this. I was just in Vienna a couple of weeks ago, and I had never been at the Leopold before, and I'd never seen Sheila or Klimt in person. I've never really seen a number of those paintings, and they were up on the wall, and I walked in there, and in between the Klimt and the Sheila were artists I had never heard about before that were strictly Viennese, and it blew me totally away. And I absolutely had to take photographs of those images because I wanted to keep them in my mind, but I also wanted to refer back to them, and I wanted to bring them home and show them to Ruth, and I wanted to have them be part of my life. But it wasn't that I was obsessed with the phone. It was like I wanted to document and then keep on going through there. But these paintings were, I mean, because we're so used to going through the Whitney and the MoMA and the Metropolitan, and we've got such great, fantastic things to look at here in New York, to go out of context and to see. I also went to a museum in Frankfurt, and they had a room full of Lichtensteins and Warhols that they had bought right after they were made. And so I don't think they've ever been shown these particular works in America. And I walked in there and I said, Jesus, this is just amazing. So I took a panoramic thing, but it was like to make sure that I never forgot that stuff existed outside of where we live in New York, and it's compelling as hell, and you really need to figure out how to. My brain, I've got a lot of stuff stored up here, but it all doesn't fit, so I've got to be able to figure out how to, compile all this stuff.
Well, Germans were collecting those.
Yeah, put it on the
The
top.
thing is, we all collect reference, you know. We all collect reference. So there's nothing wrong with photographs and pictures and put them in boxes and then refer to them and copy them and do it, whatever we do with them. But I think we look like it's a digital age. People respond to digital material more than they do to an oil painting in a museum. They go to a Van Gogh, they're looking and so it's paint, thick, colorful, but it's not the same thing as a digital print for them, as they've been trained as children.
Yeah.
You had a comment?
No, I was just going to say that's very different. Making the record of your own personal experience for your own memory trigger and for your own work and for your own thought process that's actually not that different from looking at an art book, a reproduction in a book.
What's on the difference?
In the iPhone 6, you get better color representation.
That's very different from the ubiquitous current phenomenon of self-education. I've literally been asked in museums to get out of the way if somebody wanted a picture taken or a painting. That has nothing to do with that. That was a purely consumer sort of,
I was born and raised with my siblings in New York City, and our parents were artists, and my father used to take us to the museum, to the Metropolitan. And when we were children, you could hear footsteps in the next room because the only floors in the Met then were wooden. And then Hoving came. First he worked Miracles in the Park, and then he came to the Met. And he started the first blockbuster shows. I think it was with a painting of Rembrandt's, and the lines went down the steps, all the way to the bottom of the steps, not down the blocking room. But it was the first time that happened, and there wasn't such a thing as a digital camera then, but people, it's true, were swarming all over the room with the Rembrandt painting, and it was hard to get in. But my feeling is sometimes now, when galleries and museums are really crowded, yes, it drives artists nuts because it's harder to see. But the very same audience that is cramming into galleries and museums today, they're doing so, and they're the ones that are going to, in a sense, support and appreciate the idea of tax dollars going for art and program. I'm not being a Pollyanna here either. It's just that I teach, and they're the ones that are going to support programs in schools, public schools for art.
Yeah. It's very true, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I
I'm
think
glad
as
you're
long
bringing
as
that up.
we
Yeah.
have to, yes, it's a digital age, and sometimes, and I am digitally, as my sister Anna will attest, I am technically terrible. But it's a digital age, and the artists are making work with every means possible.
Sure.
It's an evolution.
But I don't think that means obsolescence of traditional media.
No.
No. I totally disagree with that. It doesn't mean obsolescence. Any more than the camera, as the camera developed, and Dad also did work as a photographer to make a living. And when I first got,
Brownie?
no, we had brownies when we were little,
Polaroid?
but the one,
Yes, go.
Polaroid.
SX70.
the Pentax, that's what I'm trying to. Well, Dad, we grew up with Dad saying, hold it, with his Rollerflex, because you looked upside, you got everything upside down. Hold it. And I grew up home.
one of those.
I own Dad's.
So
And
an
I brought home the
SLR
Pentax.
was a revelation.
Well, yeah, and Dad said, what do you want to use that for? You get this tiny little negative. And look where we are now. And one hasn't stopped the other. There are artists still doing work with camera lucida. You know, I don't think
There's one right there, Carol Lunder, the second.
that, I don't think art in any of its forms is going to become obsolete.
Yeah.
You know?
It's just evolving in different directions from its
Yes.
I just saw an Ellsworth Kelly photo, his last thing he put together.
Yes.
It was incredible, black and white, silver gelatin prints. They were extraordinary.
Yeah.
So, there it is, you know.
Yeah.
Extraordinary of the ordinary. I mean, just,
Exactly.
ordinary.
Exactly,
You
so,
know, I mean,
yeah.
But at one point, those were like journeymen, that was the way journeymen shot their photos. I mean, that's the way journeymen worked. That was what the tradesmen did when they went out to do images. And as history goes by and those technologies get left behind to a certain degree, how much of that impacts what kind of art it becomes just because of time going by?
So what makes you the happiest about making art, and does what makes you happy involve making the art, or people reacting to the art, or people buying the art, or people talking about the art? And what makes you most unhappy about making art, in any direction or manner?
Making it is the most exciting part.
Right, but what makes you happy making it? What specific?
The specific moment when you think you have something, a trail that leads you to the alchemy that I was speaking about. Like, oh, this is, that is sparkling.
Mhm.
There's a wonder, a surprise, which might rub off on other people who think either it's funny or something. And what makes me unhappy is if I can't do it.
Mhm.
If I cannot do what I intended to for a long period of time, I get supremely unhappy because I want to get it done and have something to show. That's in my case. I don't know about others.
When I was a kid, I was a graphic designer, you
Yeah.
know, and it was like there wasn't that much wonderment in it. It was you know, you analyze something and you had a solution. You ask 10 questions and you answer it. You make a nice book jacket, right? But then when you make art, you know, there's so many unanswered questions. You know, you start out with an idea, a little germ, and it turns out to be, you know, you can get into a hell of a lot of trouble.
But you
With
can
this
use,
idea,
but you
you
can
know,
use your
and,
graphic design
It can
Yeah.
lead you
to
into
lead you another
Okay.
way. So it's a very good
But
skill.
then
to have.
Yes,
getting
exactly.
into trouble makes you happy.
And that's what makes you really happy.
Getting into trouble.
Yes.
Yeah, chaos.
Yes, definitely.
I remember having an open studio at the McDowell Colony a while back,
Oh.
and the composers, and it's a very scientific, mathematical discipline, and even the writers came to my studio, and we were all talking, and I was doing these big works on paper that were sort of collage and ink and acrylic and all kinds of comment, and they were having to do with insect life, and they kept changing as it moved on. Anyway, one of the composers said to me, you know, you guys haven't made, this is like as close to the sandbox as it gets. You know, this is you have all the fun, and I really always remember that.
I know,
That's, you know, you're right. I mean, they were like toiling away.
It's a nice
This is very
story.
disciplined sort of
Yeah.
mathematical equations that they're working out. And the writers, one writer said something that stuck with me. Said, you know, some days, you know, I'll put a comment in, and at the end of the day, I take it out. That's like, you know, it's a bad day, but sometimes that's all that happens. You know, so.
I also think there's something magical about memory. You know, I must say this about this room. I've done a number of projects with Hal, and the one room, this one always sticks in my mind. When there was nothing here, no walls or anything, and I've done a huge ramp in this room.
Yeah, with the blue
And every
color.
time I walk in,
Remember?
when I walk in this room, you know, like I always see this piece.
Close by the window.
It's just,
Yes, I've
it's just
seen
there,
it.
you know, it's there, and it's always there, 40 years later, or how many years, you know. And memory is a big, kind of, a really,
Yeah.
That's a
whether
nice.
it plays tricks on you, whether it's, you know, memory is, I'm fond of memory.
It's a delicious
A little
thing.
bit that I have left.
One of the things that I find encouraging and happy is if I go back into some of my older work that I hadn't shown or hadn't used or whatever, and kind of, you know, had sort of forgotten about it or something, and then all of a sudden I look at it again, and some things have been coming up, and it's been really inspiring, and it's like, wow, I didn't really understand what I've been doing
Yeah, that's good.
back then as what is happening now.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
that's been incredibly
Yes, yeah.
exciting. And so that's like one way that's making me happy. I think that the other part of the happy is just finding the day becomes something new. There's something happening in the piece that, even though it might be part of a larger picture, you know, has something that just sort of opens it up and gets a little more fresh and surprises me, because I didn't exactly figure that out. I'm making some sketches now for something that I've been planning on and thinking about for, you know, a number of months, but and it's actually based on some materials that happened even 20 years ago. And I'm putting this all together, and I started playing around with watercolors, which is not something I do very often, and put them up on the walls, and they're turning into these abstractions, and it wasn't initially what I was going to be trying to do, but that's what happened when I got out the brush and put it on watercolors, and all of a sudden something else was happening that I hadn't anticipated in it, and it sort of went, wow. And then I, of course, had to show them to Michael.
She shows me everything.
That's good.
But, you know, and that doesn't necessarily always make me happy either. No, but I think that
And
things
going
like
the
that.
other way,
Then, and if I get unhappy, what happens when I get
Well,
unhappy?
what makes you unhappy?
If I actually,
Can't peel the cardboard off the concrete?
actually, you know what, it turns that, regardless of what's going on there, that always has been working. I can take some of the cardboard off and it'll just go there and I just look at whatever it does and then it is it. I don't need to mess around with it. I can't chop it up. I can't sand it. I don't touch it like in that
That's
way.
honest.
The piece becomes what the material is going to be doing, and I definitely can't separate myself from it. And I find that then that has a certain power,
The
which
presence of
I think-
the presence of the piece itself
yeah,
presents, yeah.
exactly, and that I think is very
Has a
something
life of
that
its
inspires
own.
me as well, and I actually really feel very, I mean, I love those pieces. And they, you know, and I look at them again and it makes me feel good, you know, years later even, some of them. And I find that to be very, you know, it's very personal, and it gets very passionate,
Yeah. That's
and
right.
it gets very, helps me feel more confident about whatever I'm making.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are also moments when it doesn't happen as well, but
Then there's tomorrow.
then there's tomorrow, yeah. Or another layer of concrete.
Very good. You can always tell an honest work, right? You can, in another person and your own work, you can always tell when it was, there's honesty in it. I
Yeah.
think.
So coming to this panel, what did you think would happen, and what was the one thing you wanted to talk about tonight, even if no one brought it up? Jody, what did you?
Oh, wow.
Well, two things. Just quickly, I'd like to respond to the earlier question.
Oh, sure,
I
yeah.
don't know if this happens with you all, but sometimes I'll think of the color. I'll just be thinking of the color. Color will come into my mind, and I'll be thinking about, let's say, yellow for a couple of days. It kind of seeps in, goes out, and seeps in. And then that color begins to create something.
Definitely.
And it can be a form, it can be a bridge that I'm supposed to be working on, or it can be a watercolor. And slowly something starts to come, and I get excited, and I think, I've got to do it, I've got to do it.
It's coming. There's a
coming.
flow of information.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really, it's like, you know, the water is beginning to boil and boil and
Yes.
boil and boil, and then
I think we've
you
all
know,
experienced
something
that.
happens. Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't know that about artists. That something is
It's an
even
alive.
this ring of cups.
It's alive. It's
Yeah.
not something that.
Something starts off a chain reaction,
Yeah.
and a work begins to develop in your brain, and it's so exciting.
Yeah.
It's almost beyond words. It's a thrill. It's thrilling. And then what I expected, something that Cris mentioned, which I also always think of. For those of you who don't know the gallery, when Hal had rooms over there, there was a room over there, there was another large room here. I did my first installation in New York, here in the room that was over there, and it was thrilling, and the gallery was so beautiful. It was just extraordinary. I mean, these floors.
Tell me what your installation was. She's going to tell you what her installation was.
All right.
This was after the show upstairs of all the watercolors,
Yes.
when the gallery was on the top floor.
Yes.
Yeah. And then down here, I did
And then-
irrigation project for a bent finger, and it was a lot of the early work had to do with the body and the land and
blood.
and blood. And I had a coffin for a bent finger. It was digital in the corner on a mound of earth that had red in it, red color, and several very large drawings. And I don't want to hog this, but the other thing that I remember, the other installation, I had a figure going through the ceiling and a huge fishing structure that was based on a man that we all grew up with on 57th Street, who dove off 40-foot ladders into 12 inches of water on his stomach.
And his name was Henry.
Henry. And Henry was pink and going through the ceiling. And the huge fishing contraption was black, and it took up the entire room. And there was no other gallery in New York that was giving the kind of space Hal gave to artists who had never done shows in New York.
Definitely.
And I wish I could tell all of your tenants to leave.
We're planning on tearing the place down.
It was such a beautiful...
We're planning on tearing the place down again and start from scratch.
This is why we're here, really.
This is the reason we're here.
Well, I actually...
Speaking of spaces, Marja might want to talk about 170 Avenue A.
Well, actually, I wanted to speak about Franklin Street, where there was a moment, and I met Martha there, and there's Joe Zucker having a show, and then I did my performance there with the pink and the flowers and whatever, Miss Kerr, by showing my movies. But then you moved in 1985 to 11th Street and Avenue A, where we had the whole storefront, and it was 4 stores, and you had your gallery there, and it was a very different neighborhood then, and we were a little bit on the late side getting there, because Massimo Argento and Gracie Mansion were already installed, and the galleries on 11th Street are basically the last part of the East Village, because it all took place on 7th Street, Paul Bridgewater, and other Pat Hearn further up. So it was a very exciting time to be there. Yeah, it was a very exciting. Yes, and then of course Jack Shaman.
And there was
Dr. Sticker too, the Dutch.
Yeah, and there was who were the guys who had the gallery that David Wojnarowicz had a show there, and Luis Frangella.
Yes.
Those 2 crazy characters, Dean and Alan.
And there was a postmaster gallery.
Nature
and there was Nature Mort.
Yeah.
And there was Powell.
I remember the show. Remember the storefront, the Dominican storefront church?
Yeah.
On a Sunday, you would go into the gallery and you could hear clapping and stomping.
Yes, it was going on.
Hollering.
Yeah,
Sunday was the big day in East Village.
Yeah, so that was in 1985, actually. Yeah. That was an exciting prospect, and Rick Barnett working there.
Yes. Rick Barnett was in the Franklin. That's where I first met Rick.
I had the good fortune with Hal supporting me to do a traffic island out here.
Oh,
on
yes.
the street, so I had this kind of piece you can walk under, and
that was the Public Art Fund.
Yes, but Hal had to go to the. He was on a local planning board at the time. I think he had to make a little speech and tell them that it was
Community
okay.
board.
Because the tenants and the people who just moving in the neighborhood were very uptight about anything.
Of course.
You know, that was so.
But once it was there, people loved it.
Yeah, and it stayed for Frank Adio was his name, I think.
Yeah, Frank Adio.
Yeah, it was supposed to be only for 6 months, and then I'd see him on the street, and he'd say, "No, I took the paperwork and put it on the other side of the desk." He said, "It's okay, leave it up, leave it up." And I think it stayed up for like a couple of years, and never had one bit of graffiti on it.
Well, the Public Art Fund really
was-
used to do great things all over the city.
Yeah.
That was a terrific piece.
And we meaning a bunch of us here in the neighborhood, convinced them to organize projects on that triangle. And Rosemary Castoro did an
Yes,
installation there.
It was really great.
You did, other people did, and then there was Art on the Beach, which was
Right.
in Creative Time.
Yes.
Yes.
Creative Time did that, and Jody had a piece there, Rosemary had a piece there,
I had a piece.
Mary you had a piece
We
there,
had-
Mary Miss had a piece there.
Yeah.
Alice
That's
A.
great.
Crow.
Alice A.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Oh,
we
yeah,
still
Alice A.
have
Crow.
that kind of ability, that somehow Creative Time and Public Art Fund seem more nimble in those days than they do now.
Yeah,
In
they're
terms
more,
of
they've become
jumping
more
around,
philosophical
yeah.
I think there was
organizations.
leeway from the city, more leeway from the city too.
And of course, there was still,
Places
a
like that.
clock tower, and it was all in its
Yeah.
more
Along
flexible
lines.
stages. And I actually, when you opened the gallery, that's when I kind of built my little room in the back there on 11th Street to do cooking.
Mhm.
And that's where the name The Kitchen Club originated from, which was a place where I cooked for friends once in the week.
The set menus were great.
The set menu, the answering machine had a menu on it, and then it would say, this week's menu is this, and then I had recorded over from, I had a little black and white TV, and my telephone was right next to it, and so there was a Julia Child program on Sundays, and she said, and then so I was like, and this week's menu is, and then oh yeah, click, and I was like, it sounded like, Julia Child was there mentioning my cell phone, unfortunately, I didn't know about that, but it was really exciting, and so we had dinners there, or events, and that's, I remember the fun times, and across the street, was because we were across the street. Remember Ray from upstairs at the garbage? And then across the street was the Blue Rock. That was the famous building downtown where you could go and get your goods. In other words, you could go in and probably get a score bag of heroin, and I would see people come with a car waiting. I'd see like Hasidic Jewish people, and somehow word had gotten even to those people that something I had frosted windows, something must be happening there. So one guy knocked on the door one day and says, "Are the girls here? This is it? Where are the girls?" And like his locks were, like blowing. The taxi was standing there, and he had a brown paper bag. He must have just scored and thought he would get a number. There was also Brownies across the street in Avenue A on the corner. That's where you could really get your thing done. If you remember, not us, but the band. I think like early in the morning you could just get yourself, taken care of there. Absolutely. So it was a very exciting neighborhood, and I was not, at the time I didn't have my green card. And I got a lot of publicity from little things that, like the gallery scene, and then there were people having dinner. It was an exciting time.
It was all about access to real estate then, is what it was.
Oh, yeah. Well, Art on the Beach, that beach was totally open, nothing was
Oh,
built
yeah.
there, it was just, it really was a beach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the endless miracle of New York City that the
Yes.
entire landfill, the 93-acre landfill of Battery Park City, was derived from the foundation for the World Trade Center,
Yes.
which, if they were lucky, might have filled 1 acre of the riverfront. So the big mystery to this day remains, where did the other 92 acres of land come from? And I was with some people today who are visiting collectors who are here in New York from Switzerland, and they were amazed to hear that entire landfill had been created from the foundation hole of the World Trade Towers. They said, how can that be possible? And I said, it wasn't. But no one ever questioned it. No. 93 acres of new land.
Like Dutch people making their own
New real
land.
estate, new real estate.
More.
On that happy note, we're going to invite you all to join us for a glass of wine, and thank you for coming. And thank all of you.